Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to get into a video called Top 10 Things Americans Get Wrong About Their Own History. I've done a handful of videos that are sort of similar to this about all different types of different history. Some of them are good, some of them are sort of dumb, some I agree with, some I don't. So we'll see kind of where this one is, but I'm kind of curious what direction they go with it. If it's things that are like misconceptions or if it's things that like Americans are, I don't want to say dumb, but Americans just won't know. So let's jump into it. 10 things Americans get wrong about their own history.
Hello and welcome back to Most Amazing Top 10. I'm Rebecca Felgate and today we're having a bit of a fun history lesson as we talk the top 10 things Americans get wrong about their own history. Now, Americans watching, I know some of you know your correct history. For example, history buff Taylor Swift claims to know it all. So, if you're watching and you know your history, I'm sure you're gonna know all of this. But the rest of you, listen up. Here are some of the alternative facts you guys have made up about your own history. America! Coming in at number 10, Christopher Columbus discovered North America. Wrong! They all laughed at Christopher Columbus when he said the world was round. While this may be
Okay, so the argument is not that Christopher Columbus was the first person to discover America. That's not actually what's taught, or that's not really what the misconception is. The misconception is he's the first European to discover America, which also isn't totally accurate because Leif Erikson exists. However, there really isn't much to take away from when Leif Erikson showed up here. So the sort of start of real European history begins with Columbus. I feel like that's where the general misconception comes from. But obviously it wasn't a desolate land whenever he got here. There were people here. Last I heard, the general thought of how Native Americans got here was basically they crossed an ice bridge that formed and came down from, basically came down from Eastern Europe. That's, as far as what I know, that's the last I had read for the theory of how the natives got here, which, if that's the case, they were also Europeans, even though Europe didn't actually exist yet.
may be true, he was not actually the first honey to stumble upon our mate America. Firstly, how can it be discovered when Native Americans already lived there for thousands of years? I would say that's a little bit of a gaping plot hole. While it is true that Christopher did set sail in 1492, and sure, he may have thought that he was the first European to land on American shores, he actually wasn't. The first European to set foot on North American soil was actually Leif Erikson. Shout out to all the Interpol fans out there, you know who you are. Erikson was a Viking explorer who got lost and accidentally landed in the continental landmass of North America, possibly Newfoundland, which of course is Canada now, but that kind of divide came many centuries later. Nonetheless, Old Columbus is often credited. Coming into number 9, Independence Day documents were signed on the 4th of July. Wrong again! To be honest, I had no idea either, although
Yeah, no, this one is... In fact, I want to say there's even a famous quote from one of the founding fathers about the famous date that will be celebrated, and it was not the 4th of July, it was the 3rd of July or the 2nd of July maybe. I can't remember exactly what the quote is, but yeah, it's not actually the 4th of July, and to be honest, the document isn't even signed by everybody all at once. There's sort of that misconception too, that everybody at the same time, sort of like this formal meeting, came in and signed it. That wasn't actually how it happened. Not everybody signed it at one time.
I'm not American, obviously. The famous Declaration of Independence was publicly announced on the 4th of July 1776, although it was formally decided upon in a vote on the 2nd of July. After the public announcement, it took almost a month for the document to be written up and signed. Most delegates actually signed the Declaration of Independence on August 2nd, 1776. However, the American public celebrates Independence Day on the 4th of July to correlate with the public announcement.
I could have sworn the quote was for July 3rd, but maybe I'm misremembering it.
Coming in at number 8, a lot of Americans don't have any idea who they gained independence from. According to a Gallup poll, 30% of
God, this is embarrassing. This is embarrassing. And not only did we gain independence from Britain, but we had another war with them right after this. I mean, just a few decades later. So, yeah, geez.
Americans between the age of 18 to 29 do not know that they gained independence from the British. Answers.
Whoa, wait, what?
According to a Gallup poll, 30% of Americans between the age of 18 to 29 do not know that they gained independence from the British.
Jesus.
Answers actually varied from France to China. But guys, it was my British forefathers, who I guess are your British forefathers too. I feel like a lot of you people could learn a lot of things from going to see Hamilton the musical. Like A, it's excellent, and B, it's very educational. Coming in at number 7, no one actually ever shouted, "The British are coming!" Those pesky Brits. Many people think that patriot Paul Revere dramatically shouted, "The British are coming!" as British forces approached ahead of the battles of Lexington and Concord. But actually, this historic quote comes from a poem that dramatically retells Revere's horse ride to warn his people. The poem Midnight Ride by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow is where the quote comes from, not actually Paul himself. Coming into number...
Yeah, that's... okay, sort of. But that was the purpose of the ride, so he was going through telling that the British were coming. Now, there is an argument, and this is where I thought she was going to go, there is an argument that that's not actually the way it was phrased. Because obviously you wouldn't say the British are coming, you're British. Like, it's... there's an argument for this whole thing about, you know, what he would have said. But the point stands that he would have said something. Like, he didn't just... The poem wasn't just made up afterwards. Like, that was the purpose of his ride.
Number 6, a lot of Americans don't know who Hoover is. According to statistics from the University of Pennsylvania, 57% of Americans have no idea who President Hoover was. For those of you that don't know, Herbert Hoover was the 31st Prez. He was Republican, he served one term from 1929 to 1933, and he regularly ranks as one of the worst presidents of all time.
Yeah, and also... you can't just say people don't know who Hoover is, because J. Edgar Hoover was also a thing. Yeah, Herbert Hoover was the president of the United States. J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover, not known to be that cool of a guy. Herbert Hoover, not known to be that great of a president. He gets tremendous backlash for the way that he handles the bonus army, the World War I vets who want the bonus that they're promised early because the Depression has hit and is basically just crushing everybody. So they were promised they were going to get these bonuses, but they weren't supposed to get them for like a couple of more years. They show up to basically protest and to get their bonuses early, and they are ruthlessly put down. It hurts a lot of people's legacies, but none more so probably than Herbert Hoover.
If you want to know why, then you should check out our video on the top 10 worst presidents, where we go into much more detail. A popular misconception coming into number 5, a lot of Americans think that the witches in the Salem witch trials were women. The Salem witch trials were a series of hearings which resulted in mass hangings between February 1692 and 1693. While history seems to teach people that most of those punished in the case of mass hysteria were women, Actually, plenty of men were tried and killed too. 14 women were hung and killed, but 44 men were put on trial for witchcraft, 7 of which were killed, one by torture, which, Okay, so many Americans believe this, it's
Yeah. I thought she was going to go with that everybody thinks that the Salem witch trials led to just mass burnings. I actually didn't know that about the amount of men. I did know there was at least one man because there was a very interesting story about him, but yeah, I didn't know in general there were that many men that had, taken a hit during it. But one of the main misconceptions of the Salem witch trial is that they were burning witches. That's what they did. The majority of them were hanged.
crazy. At number 4, we have America defeated Hitler in the war. Yeah, well, not really, they definitely helped, but I would say the advancing Soviet Union were the main reason that Hitler lost the war. Hitler's main mistake in World War II was trying to fight a war on 2 fronts. The Western Front in France was one thing, but the Eastern Front was entirely another. The USA had no involvement in the Eastern Front. It stretched over 1,000 miles and exhausted German resources. The battles of Stalingrad and Kursk were instrumental in breaking the back of the Nazi army. Of course, America was fundamental, especially in France, but they alone could not and did not defeat Hitler. Coming in.
Okay, number 1, there was not a Western Front in France. It didn't exist at the time France had been taken. It was Vichy France. There wasn't a front there. That just wasn't a thing. So they're sort of fighting a 2-front war in that they still have, powers on their west that they have to deal with, which, is a thorn in their side and will become a full-fledged second front later on. But there isn't a front in France at that time. So this is something we've talked about on the channel a lot because this really is a pretty common misconception here. And my argument would be that there is, in my opinion, there is a strong case that the U.S. is, if not the most, one of the most influential powers to fight in the Second World War. It's not for manpower. It's not for what they were doing eventually on the ground in France, or the landings in the South. It's not about manpower, it's about manufacturing. I have heard historians make very compelling cases that basically the Soviet Union couldn't have pushed Germany out. That essentially it would have just been this World War I style stalemate once the German offensive in the Soviet Union, grinds to a halt. That the Soviets just couldn't make enough stuff and couldn't get it to the right places fast enough to basically have the offensives that they did that pushed Germany all the way back to Berlin without American manufacturing. So I do think there's an argument. Like I said, I've heard historians make this argument, and to me it's a very compelling one. But that it has nothing to do with manpower. That's more about the home front. And that's not typically where, when you hear people say that the U.S. won World War II, they're not typically talking about in manufacturing. It's generally this rah U.S. stuff, which, like I said, I do think there is an argument to be made for it, but I don't think it's in manpower. I think that's a silly argument when you look at the death totals and all the ground gained or lost or all of that. I think that's a silly argument. I think the home front argument is a much, much better one if you're going to make this case.
Into number 3, a lot of Americans think that Saddam Hussein was personally involved in 9/11.
Yep.
While the Bush administration and the congressional investigators were forced to admit that they had no evidence of Hussein's personal involvement, a lot of Americans think that he's responsible anyway. On the eve of the Iraq War, 70% of Americans believed that Saddam was responsible for the
Woo, those are some teeth.
attack, even though there's no evidence to even suggest that he had any pre-war ties with Al-Qaeda. We actually still do not know 100% who mastered 9/11, although it was likely to have been Khalid Shaikh Mohammed, who has confessed to being the architect of the disaster. Coming into number
Okay, I am not going to get super deep into this one, and my guess is YouTube is already going to bash this anyway just because of that being in there. But there are a ton. I mean, you could make a whole video that's just misconceptions about that event, or about, you know, the invasion of Iraq. There was so much, I won't say outright propaganda, although that is probably the right term for it, but there is so much like misinformation tied into that event in particular that, yeah, people think all sorts of stuff about that that's not true. You hear some arguments for the invasion of Iraq that are straight up like nonsense, like fairy tale, absolutely no truth to it, but it sounds like super official. And it's just, people just have so many wrong ideas about the whole thing. But I will say that over time, it seems like people are coming more and more to grips with being sort of led astray in regards to the invasion of Iraq.
Number 2, Mrs. O'Leary's cow never kicked a lantern over. I mean, I am shocked by this one. There's a song about it and everything. Turns out Mrs. O'Leary's cow didn't start the Great Chicago Fire by kicking a lantern over in her shed. I'm with you here, America. I thought because there's a jaunty little tune about it, it must be true. But no, it's all lies. The Great Chicago Fire that burned for 2 days from Sunday, October 8th to Tuesday, October 10th, 1871, was said to have been started in a barn belonging to the O'Learys at 137 DeCoven Street. Now, this was a false rumor to spread anti-Irish immigrant sentiments in the city, and it was started by a reporter who wrote about the story, who later admitted that it was a lie in 1911. The O'Learys and the cow were officially exonerated in 1997. Victory for the cow. Finally,
Yeah, I'm not gonna touch that actual story. That's sort of a ridiculous one. But that is something that's drastically overlooked in the modern day, is what's so bizarre about the treatment of like Irish and Italians, you know, all different sorts of groups of people. And that's not even to talk about racial tension between like black and white. But what's so bizarre about the INA, the Irish need not apply, and all that stuff is the early U.S. is nothing but immigrants from different areas. Like, it is literally nothing but that. That's all that it is. The people that are here already have only been here for a generation or two. Like, it's just such a weird, I don't know, it's such a weird thing.
what is really shocking is that, as proud as Americans claim to be of it, at number 1, most Americans do not know what the Constitution is. Despite many Americans claiming that banning guns is against their constitutional rights, many United States citizens have no idea what the Constitution is, or its history. In a 2011 study conducted by Newsweek, a citizenship test was given to 1,000 existing US citizens, and around 700 of those completing the test had no idea about the Constitution. The US Constitution is what the first United States government was founded on, and it established the first laws and rights of the United States citizens. It was signed on
Wait, what? What?
September 17th, 1787, and became
The Articles of Confederation were the first, like, base government document. It did not work. The Articles of Confederation didn't. And so the Constitution was formed that founded like the modern day centralized state, right? Before it was obviously a confederation of different, but they still kept some of that. So like I guess kind of what she said was true, but like there was something else that was in between there before the Constitution. But anyway, yes, that's what the Constitution is. What it's showing right there is the preamble. I actually had to learn this for a history class when I was in, oh, I don't know, ninth, 10th grade. So I was like 14, 15, something like that. Um, yeah, so that's what it is. But there was an Articles of Confederation first. They had major issues with it. It did not give the central state enough power. There were all sorts of issues with taxes and currencies and interstate movement and things of that nature. So then they formed the Constitution, and that is the founding, the building block, the founding document of the modern day, like, state of the U.S.
Became effective around 18 months later. The first 10 amendments of the Constitution are known as the Bill of Rights. There are 27 amendments overall, although some have been repealed, like the 18th, which prohibited the manufacturing and sale of alcohol within the country, which boo. So our perspective on history is always changing, and hindsight gives us so many answers that we can't find at the time of an event. History is something that is really important to stay in tune with. Why? Because as the famous saying goes, those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So guys, who's watching that is American that knew all of this? Let me know in the comments section down below. Also let me know if you learned something new today. I for one actually really did. Who knew?
Okay, so that was top 10 things that Americans get wrong about their own history. I'm curious what everybody else thought of this, how everybody did on this. I'm just kind of curious what everybody thinks. And are you surprised that a lot of people don't know these? Because I feel like a lot of these are super simple, super simple. So I'm curious what everybody thinks. As always, like, comment, subscribe, help me keep building the channel over here, and I will see you all next time.